Okay, well, thank you very much for that intro, Eric. I should point out that throughout this paper, I'm going to be using the words banner and flag somewhat interchangeably. So in all 1850s references, contemporaries use the word banner, possibly to avoid the appearance of disloyalty to the existing British flag. However, the design of the item that I'm talking about, this one, the Australasian League flag, although I'll be moving on and talking about all sorts of other instances of this in future, which has mounting points on the left-hand edge, designates that this item is a flag rather than a banner in standard vexillological terminology. I don't know if this is the first time you've had a vexillology lecture here, but it's a good word, despite its use in a banner-like manner. So please don't get too confused when I switch around between the two. So, in May 1850, the Australasian League was formed with one of its principal aims being the cessation of convict transportation to the Australian colonies. I tell a lie, I got that completely wrong. In May 1850, the Australian League was formed in Sydney with one of its principal aims being the cessation of convict transport to the Australian colonies. Similar movements were active in the other colonies, including here in Van Diemen's Land, where anti-transportation feeling had been building for at least a decade. 1,750 people signed Mr. Pitcairn's petition in December of 1845, and this was followed by a series of petitions from the clergy, from merchants and general citizens addressed to the Queen and Houses of Parliament, including one that bore more than 5,000 signatures in 1847. So a Launceston Anti-Transportation Association was formed in 1850, which was closely followed by a Hobart Anti-Transportation League. So in December of 1850, planning commenced for an anti-transportation conference in Melbourne. So this picture is actually showing the departure of the delegates. The conference was supported by the anti-transportation movements of New South Wales and South Australia, although neither of them actually sent any delegates. So the Reverend John West, mastermind and founder of the League, was elected delegate for Hobart Town, despite being Launceston-based, with Mr. W.P. Weston, who was sent representing Launceston. So in preparation for the Melbourne conference, West is credited with designing a banner for the Anti-Transportation League to be unfurled at the Melbourne meeting. So it's quoted here. This is from the Argus in Melbourne. The banner is a deep blue with the Union Jack in the corner, the broad field displaying 4 stars, the Southern Cross. On the upper border are the words in gold, Australasian Anti-Transportation League. On the lower margin, established 1851. So this is the first version of this flag. No versions of this actually survive at the moment that we know of. If anyone's got one hiding in their basement, please let us know. So West did actually initiate and design the banner, but the idea of using the Southern Cross seems to have come from a Dr. Greaves, the ex-mayor of Melbourne. So this is John West, a portrait in the museum's collection by the artist Myra Felton. This is a younger John West. He was very, very conscious of his image to the public, and he usually appears in this kind of thoughtful pose in a lot of his portraits. And you can see here on the letterhead, the Australasian League letterhead, you can see that that's an example of the flag again with the Southern Cross in its natural formation. We don't have any pictures of it with 4 stars, but we know it started with 4. So Weston, the Launceston delegate, is quoted as saying, the League was indebted, did I put this as the next slide? Yes, to many friends for suggestions, but the banner in effect came from his valued friend, Mr. West. It was his proposal to give a flag to the people of Victoria, and they had received one in return. He hoped that all the colonies would make a similar interchange. They were indebted to Dr. Greaves, the ex-mayor of Melbourne, for the suggestion of the Southern Cross. So this is interesting. So it appears to have been West's instigation, but a bit of a committee effort in actually coming up with the design. So on January the 27th, a meeting of the Tasmanian Victorian delegates was held in Melbourne, at which it was resolved to initiate the Australasian League, with the public meeting set up for the following Saturday, February the 1st. And in the Port Phillip Gazette, they recorded, a meeting of the Tasmanian delegates and the General Committee of the Anti-Transportation Association was held in the Mechanics Institution yesterday. The Reverend John West, delegate for Hobart Town, in the chair, at which orders were given for the immediate preparation of a banner for the League. So this is interesting actually, in that the flag that we hold in our collection, we're not quite sure which one it is, whether it's the one that was, it's unlikely to be the one that was sewn here because it has 5 stars on it. It may have been one that was given to the Launceston delegates by the delegates from Victoria, or it could have been the other way round. We've got no way of knowing. So this was the banner to be presented to the Tasmanian delegates at the conference. It's possible that this is now the flag held in the Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery in Launceston. So this is possible this is the one that was presented, which is how it came back here and was found in the Mechanics Institute. It was presented to the Tasmanian delegates on February the 13th, and the fact that it had to be prepared in such a short time may perhaps explain why the words instituted 1851 are in fact reversed on this flag. Another possible explanation for this typological oddity is that the text was designed to be read from the top, around the white border of the flag, therefore it runs in the right direction. That's my current favourite theory, but I have no idea whether it's correct. So the 5th star had been added to West's design to represent New Zealand, joining the 4 Australian colonies of Victoria, South Australia, New South Wales and Tasmania. Bear in mind here that Queensland declined to join, and Western Australia still wanted convicts at the time and were in no hurry to try and actually get rid of them. So they declined to join as well. So Henry Button wrote later in his book Flotsam and Jetsam, at this meeting the constitution of the League and an address to the colonists of Australasia were adopted. Also the flag of the association, a blue ensign with the Union Jack in the upper hoist quarter and in the centre 5 white stars. The Southern Cross, the familiar constellation of southern skies, emblematic of the 5 colonies. Queensland had not at that point been separated from New South Wales. Sorry, I got that wrong before. Similar meetings were held at Sydney and Adelaide, where branches of the League were formed. Everywhere, the people entered upon the struggle with immense enthusiasm and renewed hope, the motto of the League being, "The Australias are one," and that of its banner, "Under this sign we conquer." A fund of £20,000 was quickly provided as sinews of war, dozens of individuals and firms subscribing 100 guineas each. This was a considerable amount of money at the time. The people of Victoria presented to their brothers of Tasmania a beautiful silk banner which floated proudly from the masthead of the schooner Swift as she brought the returning delegates to Launceston on the 6th of March 1851. So this is why I think that this is probably the flag that we hold now. Captain Bell, which is actually made of silk, it's 4 metres long. Captain Bell of the Raven had a copy of the flag in bunting made in Melbourne, which flew from the Briggs Peak as she left that city. But Captain Irving of the Swift had the honour of being the first to fly it in Tasmanian waters. Clearly, there were multiple copies of this flag made. The Northern Tasmanian branch of the League offered them for sale. This is an advertisement. The League banner. The Council of the Northern Tasmanian branch have contracted for the supply of ship's ensigns, facsimiles of the banner of the Australasian League, which will be supplied to ship owners and masters at the wholesale cost price, on sale at R.G. Gibbons Wharf, Launceston, April the 25th. That's actually from the Cornwall Chronicle. Interesting that that's actually advertised in the Cornwall Chronicle, because the Cornwall Chronicle was actually the big rival of the Examiner, which was actually unofficially edited by John West. So the banner was flown from ships around the world and featured in many local ceremonies. In March in Hobart in August, quote, 4 beautiful League banners were carried in front by Tasmanians, And in an October procession, bear in mind they're using the word Tasmanians already here, despite the colony still being known as Van Diemen's Land. And in an October progression, a large number of the native-born young men followed with 3 large League banners. That's from the Colonial Times in 1851. It's uncertain whether these reproduced flags carried the wording Australasian League or instituted 1851, although many seem to have retained the white border as recorded in South Australia. A new and handsome flag has been noticed flying from the masts of some of our intercolonial traders lately. It is blue with a broad white border, the Union Jack in one corner and 5 stars on the field. We first noticed it on the Perry, Captain Curator. It is the banner of the Anti-Transportation League. The 5 stars representing the provinces that have joined the League, namely Tasmania, New South Wales, South Australia, Victoria and New Zealand, are grouped in the shape of the Southern Cross. The off one, called a pointer, representing New Zealand. The whole collected being in the position of the respective colonies. In fact, the new flag from the Brig Alert caused a stir in San Francisco in 1852. There was one particular flag which attracted a great deal of attention, floated from the Brig Alert, and none could tell what it represented, or to what nation it belonged, as no one had ever seen anything like it. On inquiring of Captain Thomas Abbott, the master of the Alert, the anxious public were informed that it was the flag of the Australasian League and represented the states of New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, New Zealand and Van Diemen's Land, which in all probability will before long be a free and independent confederacy like our own. Captain Abbott was very courteous to the numerous persons who inquired of him respecting the strange flag and fully explained the circumstances to which the flag in question may be traced. And that was in the San Francisco Herald on July the 19th, 1852. So the Australasian League flag seems to have quickly gone out of use following the cessation of transportation in 1853. This is the celebrations of the cessation of transportation celebrations in Launceston in 1853. This is by Susan Faraday. This one's actually held in the Allport Library. So this was a specific purpose emblem created for use in a campaign whose raison d'etre had ceased to exist with the cessation of transportation. The Australian ensign, this flag, gradually became the de facto national flag of Australia. This was a modification of the former colonial national flag, the British white ensign with a blue cross of St George carrying 5 white 8-pointed stars. However, although the campaign had ended, evidence does exist that the iconography used in the flag continued in the public consciousness. So these are my arguments for the continuation in the public consciousness of the design of the Australasian League flag and why I still feel that despite many other arguments, it is actually still the first antecedent of the current Australian flag. So, there is no currently known direct causal link between the design of the current Australian flag and the Anti-Transportation League flag. None of the winners of the 1901 competition for the design of the nation's flag referred directly to the Anti-Transportation League flag. Some may not even have been aware of the Australasian League flag's existence. However, a look at the continuance of the use of the iconography of the flag and the appearance of the design or elements of it in many places argues fairly strongly for a link through the design's existing presence in the public consciousness. The fact that 5 people independently submitted essentially the same design suggests that the idea of a, quote, defaced British ensign, that's the vexillological term for when you've actually done this, I'm not being rude, together with the Southern Cross, represented in its natural formation, was actually well established in the public consciousness. A further factor muddying the waters of the debate around the flag design is, of course, the flag of New Zealand. This too bears a striking similarity to the Australasian League flag, and again, given New Zealand's part in the League, this may be more than a coincidence. So interestingly, the New Zealand flag design was in common use on ships earlier than the Australian version, despite it only being officially adopted in 1902, 1 year after the Australian flag. The New Zealand flag was designed by Admiral Sir Albert Hastings Markham, and he served at Australia's Station in 1868, where he helped suppress blackbirding, the illegal trading of slaves between Queensland and the South Sea Islands. While he was there, he came up with the design, this one, which he submitted to the Governor of New Zealand in 1869. This design was adopted and put into use, although it didn't actually become official until 1902. The design of the New Zealand flag features the Southern Cross with 4 stars rather than the 5 used on both the ATL flag and the official Australian flag. However, it should also be noted that the initial design for the Australasian League flag also featured only 4 stars of the cross. And both these designs feature the Southern Cross with 4 stars in their natural formation rather than stylised. So this raises the question, how much does the current Australian flag owe to the New Zealand joining the Australasian League? It's also interesting to note, as reflected by the New Zealand flag itself, that the Southern Cross itself appears to have been regarded as being 4 stars only, with the 5th only added consistently to any iconography as a result of the Australasian League banner and its successors. So they only added it because New Zealand joined. The existence of the flag of New Zealand from 1869 would have ensured that the main elements of the iconography of the ATL flag continued to be seen on ships, despite the Anti-Transportation League flag no longer being in use. So, 1 year after the development of the New Zealand flag, another design bearing a striking similarity to the Australasian League flag came into use. The original Victorian flag, or ensign, proclaimed in 1870. The flag was intended for use by the first Australian colonial warship, HMVS Nelson, and red versions were also produced for the use by the Mercantile Marine. For those of you who don't know, the red version was always the People's flag, the one for the Mercantile Marine. The blue version was flown on warships. That's kind of changed a bit recently. So the imperial crown above the Southern Cross was added in 1877, which you see now on the Victorian flag, although the Victorian red ensign without the crown was used on commercial shipping right up until Federation. Seems very reasonable assumption that designers of the original Victorian flag would have been aware of and influenced by the Australasian League design, which had been so prominent in their state less than 20 years earlier, as well as having seen other examples of similar designs in use. Right, the Southern Cross in its natural form was briefly featured also on the first flag of Tasmania, which was proclaimed by the governor Sir Frederick Weld on the 9th of November 1875. This flag was not approved by the Secretary of State for the Colonies in London, and the current Tasmanian flag, featuring the lion rampant, was adopted in 1876. I mean, you can kind of see why this didn't survive. It's not a particularly elegant flag. So, further adding to the evidence for the continuance in the public consciousness of the iconography of the Australasian League flag design is an object in the collection of this museum, of the Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery. This is the Launceston Artillery Challenge Cup of 1882. And it's unusual in that, unlike the other known examples of this trophy, of which we hold 2, it was made interstate in Melbourne. So this was made by Edwards and Call, prominent Melbourne silversmiths. But what's interesting about it, and one of the main reasons I was actually really keen to collect this item, is that it features a pair of crossed flags on the base in enamel and gold. One flag is, of course, the Union Jack, but the second one resembles the Victorian ensign as it appeared at the time, a design with the Union Jack in canton, so top left, and the Southern Cross represented naturalistically on the fly. Other than the Victorian ensign, no official flag bearing a naturalistic Southern Cross existed at this time. Nevertheless, the flag on this trophy is described in newspaper articles as being respectively, quote, the Southern Cross flag, that was in the Tasmanian, the 10th of February 1883, and the Australian ensign, also in 1883. This gives further credence to the idea of the common currency of this design of flag prior to the design of the official Australian flag in 1901. The use of the term Australian ensign is interesting here, as this usually refers to a modification of the former colonial national flag, the one I showed you before, the British white ensign with a blue cross of St George carrying 5 white 8-pointed stars. The flag's use on vessels was prohibited by the British Admiralty in 1883 due to its claimed similarity to the Royal Navy's white ensign. So this is another intriguing object, currently privately held, although I understand it's recently been purchased by a museum. I just need to actually get the details on this. It's also showing the continuance of the design. This artefact is a ceremonial pedestrian belt, the Grand Challenge Belt of Australasia, awarded in 1886 to W. Clark by the Committee of the Flemington Running Grounds for a 120-yard running race. And what's interesting about it, of course, it features once again 2 enamelled flags. I would be very, very surprised if these weren't done by the same enameller. There's only so many people capable of this type of work in Melbourne at the time. So one is, of course, the Union Jack, but the other is a defaced British ensign with the Southern Cross with all 5 stars on the fly. Most Australian vexillographers recognise a clear lineage between the Australasian League flag and the current national flag. So Australian flag historian John Vaughan says, the Australasian Anti-Transportation League flag of 1851 does have a claim to having a direct lineage to the Australian national flag since 1901. Having researched the history of the various flags of Australasia for decades, the lineage is evident for all to see who studied the early flag designs of Australia and New Zealand. While this seems an understandable and intuitive assumption, given the similarity of the flags, a direct connection is actually much harder to establish. This is why groups like the Australian National Flag, what are they called? There's the Australian National Flag Society, I think it is, do not agree with my contention here. So the current design for the Australian flag was arrived at through a national government-sponsored federal flag competition in 1901. The competition attracted 30,000 entries from all around Australia, and the £200 prize was shared between 5 entrants. Ivor Evans, a 14-year-old schoolboy from Melbourne, Leslie John Hawkins, a teenager apprenticed to a Sydney optician, Egbert John Nuttall, a Melbourne architect, Annie Dorrington, an artist from Perth, and William Stevens, a ship's officer from Auckland, New Zealand. The Weekly Times commented, many of them have discarded precedent altogether, and fearful and wonderful indeed to behold are many of the products of their imagination. Many of the designs submitted can only be regarded as miracles of misplaced ingenuity. That's not referring to the the ones that won. This is referring to some of the other designs. However, on choosing these 5 designs, the judge's report read in part, it was apparent that a Commonwealth flag to be representative should contain the Union Jack on a blue or red ground, a 6-pointed star representing the 6 federated states of Australia directly under the Union Jack, and the Southern Cross on the fly as being indicative of the sentiment of the Australian nation. So we could actually regard this as, if this was what was meant to be representative, it's really limiting the number of designs you can come up with those elements. One could almost say the competition was slightly rigged. The winning flag design was, of course, strikingly similar to the Australasian League flag and also to the flags of Victoria and New Zealand. The problem is, of course, that there is no direct evidence that the Australasian League flag influenced any of the 5 successful designers of the Australian flag. There appear to be no newspaper interviews with or articles about the winners that may shed any light on their creative processes. This was simply not the journalistic style of the day. Ivor Evans' father reportedly had a flag-making business in Launceston, so there may be a pretty reasonable expectation that he was aware of the original Tasmanian design. Despite an extensive search, neither myself or others have been able to find any publication printed prior to 1901 that may have shown the Australasian League flag, with the exception of the League letterhead itself. All entrants would, however, have been aware of a Victorian flag, with its similar use of the Southern Cross, and this must have been an influence on the design process. Victorian ensign appears to be the most likely lineage connecting the Australasian League flag in the QVMAG's possession to the current Australian national flag. A similar connection through the New Zealand flag is also plausible. The involvement of New Zealand in the Australasian League means that they would have been aware of the ATL banner in the mid-19th century. The use of the New Zealand flag prior to its official adoption does raise the question of the awareness of the design in New Zealand as well. So, in conclusion, I think it can be very plausibly argued that the Australasian League banner was a strong influence on the designers of the Victorian flag, and that the connection between the Victorian flag and the current Australian national flag is pretty clear to see. So, thank you very much for listening to my rather long and involved arguments about flags. I'm quite happy to take any questions if anyone has any. I hope that wasn't too short. Yes, the design was come up with in 1901, but the actual Flag Act wasn't passed till, I can't remember. You know the date, don't you? No. I should know the date because I looked it up at one stage. It was actually considerably later. Yes, it was 1950s. So it's actually one of those very interesting things that when Eric mentioned the corrugated iron as being something that we have all fought under, which I think is rather amusing. One of the interesting claims that is often made by, now I'm not being political on this at all, by the way, this is all about the historical use, but the claim that Australians have fought and died under the Australian flag is actually false. It wasn't until 1996 that the Australian flag actually appeared on Australian military uniform. Prior to that, it just didn't have it. And the flag that they fought under was the Union Jack. So that's not necessarily a huge argument in favour of one thing or another, but it does mean that particular argument about the flag that Australians have fought under is pretty much moot. Corrugated iron, on the other hand.
I just have a slightly unrelated question. The Victorian ensign had the 5 stars on it, but each one of them is different.
Yes.
What's that all about?
It was meant to, the design, they actually did that to reflect the relative brightness of each of those stars in the night sky. So the number of points tells you how bright they are. In fact, if you look at, you look at this one, all the stars are the same. So that was a sort of an adjustment of this. And as you notice, if we go back quite a way on this presentation to there, if you notice that the Federation star, of course, has less points on it because of the less states to represent. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 instead of 7 points. And you can see that on this version as well, the relative brightness of the stars is represented by the number of points. Yes.
Thanks very much. Very interesting presentation. I think you, in the 1882 trophy, there seemed to be a border around the Union Jack, and that seems to have disappeared in 1886.
I'll just.
Did I miss it? Yeah.
Yes, that one's got a border.
Seems to be a border around the Union Jack there.
Yes, there does.
Whereas there, it's gone again.
Yes, I suspect, but don't hold me to this, but I suspect this is actually just to do with the enamelling process and how they actually went about holding the enamel in between each one of those lines. So if you look at this one, it is a much coarser piece of enamelling than the pedestrian belt. So this one's 1882. So whoever was doing that enamelling is either someone different or they just got better.
That was my point. You said you thought it was the same person, but
there is a difference. And I may be completely wrong here. It's just I did a bit of an extensive search for who was doing enamelling at the time in Melbourne, and I only came up with one enameller, and it wasn't Edwards and Call, who probably would have sent out to have these made, which is also evidenced by the fact that the flagpoles are made in a different metal. They're gold. So it's so it may not actually be the same manufacturer, but it just seemed to be, I just could not find very, very many people doing that degree of fine silverwork enamelling. Ah, yes, having a look at the flag here, you can see how many points are on the Federation star now. 8 points. Is it 8? 7, it should be 7. Unless someone's put a misprint on your flag. It is 7, yes. The state, yes, representing the 7 states and territories.
So that's correct for now?
That's correct now, yes. Yeah.
What would have happened if New Zealand had stayed in the effort to become federated? Because during federation, New Zealand was going to join in, but pulled out. So how would that have affected the flag? Will we all have New Zealanders and Australians have flown the same flag?
I imagine we probably would have, yes. And the likelihood is it would look something like both of the current flags. I mean, I think the very, very interesting thing about the adoption of the Australian flag is that by that point, the issue of running a national flag as a, quote, defaced British ensign, because it's the British ensign, which has just got the Union Jack in the top left and then a plain field, is an official British naval flag and merchant marine flag, and there's a version for the Admiralty. It's prior to that, it never actually, the only way you could use this was not actually as a national flag, it was actually as an ensign representing these flags representing something that was part of Britain. Hence the first Australian warship in 1870 gaining a flag with an additional badge on the fly. And when you look down here at the Tasmanian flag down here, it has the additional badge on the fly as well. All of our ensigns do. So it's interesting that they actually, by this point, allowed a defaced naval ensign to become an official actual flag, which is actually illegal under British flag law. Or at least was.
I think you mentioned to me when we were speaking before that this was the first of all the Commonwealth that put the defaced ensign up, the defaced Union Jack up on the left. Is that, am I misremembering what you told me?
Sorry, the Australasian League flag.
Yeah, the first of all the Commonwealth, because lots of Commonwealth countries put the Union Jack up on the top corner.
Yes.
And I think you mentioned to me that the idea came from Australia. Is that right, or am I misremembering?
Well, this is what I'm contending, and this is the first time you ever saw this happen in a flag that was not an ensign.
I'm meaning not for the Australian Commonwealth, I'm meaning all the Commonwealth countries.
It's the first use of the Southern Cross in its natural formation on any flag or banner.
No,
anyway.
not
the Southern Cross.
I mean,
yes.
the other Commonwealth countries, not Australia, but the other Commonwealth countries have the Union Jack. I mean, Canada used to have.
Yes.
Didn't it? And I thought you'd said to me that Australia was the first to put the Union Jack up in the corner. Or am I misunderstanding?
I think that might be a misunderstanding because I'm not aware of that. Sorry. I actually don't know who was the first to use it. Yeah.
Were the British ever at all upset about us playing around with their flag? So I would have assumed that they might have been, but from your presentation, I feel the sense was, oh, isn't that interesting?
Essentially, that's the sense I got. I mean, one of the interesting things about this one is that the League deliberately put the Union Jack in the top left to show that this was not a flag of rebellion. This was a deliberate attempt to show loyalty to the Crown. What they were asking for was colonial self-determination, not colonial independence, which is interesting when you look at that quote from the US when they're talking about that and saying that there will soon be a independent confederation like us. That wasn't actually what the League was asking for. They were asking for a degree of political self-determination in the form of something like I can never say legislative council. So it was meant to be, it was there specifically, John West actually said, to show that this is not a flag of rebellion. I think it's a very interesting point that this is prior to the Eureka flag, which was a flag of rebellion, tends to be the flag, the Australian historical flag, that gets focused on more. But in terms of actual impact, the big impact of Eureka wasn't actually the rebellion, it was the court cases afterwards. The big impact of this was it was the first movement for Australasian self-determination. So it actually arguably had a far greater impact on the politics of Australia than something like Eureka did. It's just that because it was a campaign carried out not by a bunch of uppity miners who wanted to be middle class, but by a group of actual middle class, largely gentlemen and mechanics, those who were not willing to form a militant group, it actually had a greater impact on Australian politics in the long run.
I didn't quite catch the difference of opinion between you and the Australian Flag Society.
The Australian National Flag Association.
Yeah.
They maintain very, very strongly that there is no direct link between the Australasian League flag and the 1802 competition winner. I'm not actually claiming there was a direct link, but what I am claiming is that the ideas were patently, obviously around in various forms from the instigation of this flag right through to federation, and that claiming that that the Australian flag design is an entirely independent idea is a fallacy. That particular association feels that 5 people came up with the current flag design entirely independently without having actually stolen the idea from anything. Personally, I think they all stole the idea from something. It may not have been directly from this flag, but it was certainly directly from the Victorian ensign, from the New Zealand flag, and all the other examples of this that were floating around in public consciousness at the time. The fact that a newspaper on referencing this calls that one the Australian ensign, which it patently obviously isn't, tells you that people were quite aware of this flag floating around at the time. It's interesting here that this particular trophy, it's a Launceston trophy, but it was made in Melbourne. And I think the interesting thing is that Edwards and Call obviously just chucked the flags on because they knew this was what people liked. They even actually chucked a motto on there, which was a Victorian one, not a Tasmanian one, for the artillery, which appears on I think it's Ut Pace Aut Bello, which is not the motto of the Launceston Volunteer Artillery. So this tells you more about what was going on in people's minds in Victoria than it does about Launceston, which I think is interesting because then we're talking about the continuance of that design interstate as well as here. Yeah.
The Tasmanian flag, of course, has got a very un-Tasmanian emblem on it.
It has, hasn't it? Yes.
I wonder if you comment or tell us how the different states, at the timing of choice of their various emblems, and what, if any, influence the development of the Australian national flag has had on the states' flags.
Well, this is an area I'm not quite as strong on, I'm afraid, but I can actually give you a little bit of insight. I do know that when the Tasmanian ensign needed to be come across, there was actually a suggestion that they put the Southern Cross on there, but Victoria had already nicked it years before. So as far as I'm aware, the lion is there as a sign of British loyalty. Tasmania has for a long time particularly because I suppose it's one of those impacts of the convict past. Because we took in so many convicts here and so many people have convict ancestry, there was a huge campaign to wipe this out of the public consciousness. And for a while, Tasmanians were considered some more British than the British. There was a higher degree, for example, in the Boer War, there was a much, much higher number of enlistees in the Boer War from the Tasmanian contingent than there were from any other states. It was a way of showing loyalty and showing a disconnection from that convict past into being loyal citizens of empire. So my knowledge of that is basically it was to do with an overt sign of loyalty by picking a British emblem. Mm. Yes, there we go. I didn't know that. That's excellent. So it's been quite a thing in Tasmania for some time. I think we had a question over here somewhere, didn't we? Sorry, making you run around.
Thank you. I was wondering if there's any significance between different flags having 6, 7 and 8 points on them. I've seen one where the Southern Cross is represented with a different number of points on the various stars. Is there any significance in it? And what was the discussion that led to that?
Oh, the reason for the different points on the stars is generally to represent the relative brightness of the stars in the sky. So the more points, the brighter the star. That's, as far as I'm aware, the only major significance with that. Yeah.
And they were holding their first service in Egypt, they'd forgotten to bring the Australian flag with the blue background. So somebody went down to the port and grabbed a red ensign, and they used that.
Yes.
In their first service in Egypt.
Mm. So yes, that is actually interesting because, of course, that was the mercantile marine flag, but also the red ensign was actually considered for many years to be the people's flag. When they first actually brought in the use of the current Australian flag in the 1950s, most people flew the red version because the blue version was the official government one. That only changed over later. So there's actually a very famous World War I picture of Australians charging a German pillbox under an Australian flag, which is total fiction, by the way. It never happened. They did charge a German pillbox. They just didn't do it with an Australian flag. They did it with a British one. But in that particular piece of fiction, the flag's red. So it's quite a common thing. The red was always regarded to be the flag of the people.
John, thank you. Got a bit of library in my blood.
Mm-hmm.
Either your first or second slide image had in pencil at the top 1990. And I'm wondering whether that's when it came into the catalogue here, or is it
this one's not actually from our collection. This is a National Library item. Yes, that 1990 is certainly not relating to the date it was made. But yes, as far as I know, that might be the date of acquisition. Did I record the number on this? No, I didn't. No, I'm afraid I don't know where the 1990 comes from, but I suspect it's something to do with the year it came into. Although in 1990, they wouldn't have been writing on it on the front at that point. No, they wouldn't, because it's a National Library. I mean, libraries are well known for, and in fact, you can see their catalogue number on the bottom left. It says cat number 8 something Yeah, so, no, I'm afraid that's a bit of a mystery to me. It's a wonderful sketch with a whole lot of notes, and I was very, very lucky to find it. But, yes, I'm afraid that the 1990, which is very well spotted, means very little to me.
And it obviously is an artist's... Sorry, it's obviously an artist's sketch prior to making the painting.
Yes, and
which must be somewhere.
Hopefully. I've never seen the painting, and I've never come across anybody else who has either. So, again, if someone's got it hiding in their attic, please pull it out. I say this, and people do have things hiding in their attic that they pull out that are amazingly significant occasionally. Thank you.
From time to time, to move off the history and into the present day, from time to time, people have told me that citizens are not allowed to fly an Australian flag in their front yard or on their chimney pot or privately. What is the legal situation of the ordinary citizen using our national flag?
I actually have a brochure on that upstairs, and yes, they are actually allowed to. Those rules were changed when they switched the official people's flag from being the red ensign to the blue ensign. Oh, the red background to the blue background. So yes, as far as I'm aware, anyone's actually allowed to fly the Australian flag. It's not restricted. I mean, the red ensign is still used by the Mercantile Marine. White ensign is still used by the Navy, and you're not allowed to fly those. But yes, as far as I'm aware, you actually are allowed to fly the Australian flag, hence the fact you can buy it very easily from a flag supplier without having to pay any fines. I think I've exhausted everybody. Well, thank you very much for your attention.